Hi, I'm Tamara, and today I am going to walk you through all of the steps that you need to know so that you can make some adorable gift bags for Christmas. I have all of the measurements linked in the description down below, so you can definitely check those out to help you out. However, once you make one of these gift bags, you will discover you really can adjust those measurements to do the same thing and make any size gift bag you want. This gift bag here is my size large. This one here is my medium. And this gift bag here is the small. All right, let's get sewing.
All right, so the first thing that you're going to need is two different types of fabric. The one type of fabric will be your large piece of fabric. For the sake of this tutorial, we're doing the small bag. So you'll cut two pieces out, cut at 8 inches by 11 inches, and then you will cut out two small squares at 4 inches by 4 inches. You will also need ribbon for your casing, and then any extra embellishments like lace or that pom-pom detail there to add along your triangle edging. But that one is optional. When you're adjusting this bag to any size, all you do is you measure the bottom of the bag, divide it in half, and that will give you the size that you want to cut your squares at. All right, so now we want to make our triangles, but because I'm using a white fabric, I'm actually going to stack. So I've got two squares here. One is just a plain white backing, and I'm going to put it underneath my white square. That way, when I lay it on top of my red fabric, I won't be able to see through it. But if you are not using a white fabric, then just skip that extra layer and lay your square down. Add your ruler on top of your square from point to point and then cut across. Do this for your second square so that you end up with 4 triangles. All right, now we're going to take our two larger pieces, our 8-inch by 11-inch pieces of fabric, and we are going to iron a 1/4 inch fold down along the top of both of those pieces of fabric. To make it easier to sew a 1/4 inch seam, I like to use cardstock where I've marked a 1/4 inch down, and I'll lay it across the edge, and it will help me iron, especially on the triangles. There is actually a proper ironing ruler that you can use, which I will link in the description down below, as this cardstock method only works temporarily and eventually the cardstock starts to curl, or you may even start burning the paper. Another method that I like to use is using my sewing gauge, which I will link to that sewing gauge as well, because I find that it's a fantastic ruler to help you sew at a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, whatever you're needing to measure out quickly. It's a fantastic tool. Once you have ironed those 1/4 inch edges on the larger fabric, now it's time to move on over to the triangles, and you'll do the same thing along the long side of each triangle. Because the triangles are small, they can be a little bit finicky, so I find this cardboard method to iron those edges is a really nice way to do it. But if you are going to use the cardboard, then make sure that you are ironing at a very low temperature. And one more thing that I did with the triangles after ironing them is I just clipped them in place. That way they had time to cool in that folded state. All right, so next take those two larger pieces of fabric, take them to the sewing machine, and just sew along that top edge to both of those ironed 1/4 inch edges. And now it's time to add our triangles. So we are going to lay our fabric right side up, making sure that we are paying attention to where the top of our fabric bags are, and then attach your triangles to the bottom 4 corners. So just pin them in place. We haven't sewn across that ironed edge yet. We want to do that with them laying on top of our fabric. So once all 4 of our triangles are placed onto the fabric where they belong, then it's time to pin along that top edge if you are not going to be adding any embellishments. And if you're going to choose not to do any embellishments, then a nice added feature to just the plain flat triangles would be to do 2 seams across the top. So you would sew a seam close along to the upper edge, and then just move your sewing foot in about 1/8 of an inch, and then sew along that edge one more time, and it'll give it a really nice look. For myself, what I did is I made the triangles on the backs of my bags plain, and then on the front side of my bag, I decided to add embellishments. So it really is whatever you choose, and all you'll do is you'll tuck that embellishment underneath that ironed fold that you've already created, pin it in place, and then sew along the top edge of your triangle, and that will secure your embellishment in place. All right, so now that we've sewn across the top edge of all 4 of our triangles and we've sewn those embellishments in place, it's time to just trim off those little triangle edge pieces there. And then we are going to turn our fabric wrong sides up. Make sure that we know where the top of our fabric is. And then we are going to use this handy little sewing gauge that I was talking to you about earlier. And we are going to measure down between 2.5 to 3 inches. It really depends on how thick your ribbon is. So the longer that you measure down, the bigger your casing will end up being. And now that we've made these marks, we can lay our fabric right sides together, and then we are going to sew around the entire outer edge at a 1/2 inch seam, starting at 1 marking, going all the way down to the bottom corner, pivoting, sewing across, pivoting again, and then sewing up to our 2nd marking that we made.
All right, you guys, I'm just gonna quickly interrupt myself here just to ask you to please click that thumbs up button if you're finding this tutorial helpful. Subscribe and click that notification bell so that you don't miss future tutorials if you're interested in beginner sewing projects like this. All right, let's get back to sewing.
All right, so we've sewn all the way around the outer edge, and now it is time to clip those bottom corners so that we can take away a bunch of that excess. Do this carefully, of course, so that you don't actually catch the seam that you've just sewn, as that would create a hole and ruin all of our hard work. All right, so now we're going to take it to our iron, and we are just going to iron in on both sides the top of our seams that we had not actually sewn over. Then bring it to the sewing machine and sew down, across, and back up on both of those side seams. This will hold that fold in place, which is really helpful when you start putting your ribbon through your casing. Next, we will fold the top down to form the casing. We're going to match the edges of each point with the open edge of each side seam. Once that's done, pin it in place and then throw an iron over that fold just to hold it in place while you take it to the sewing machine. Do this on both sides, and then you are ready to take it to the sewing machine and sew straight across along the bottom edge of both of these folds. I like to use my previous seam that held that 1/4 inch fold in place as my guide for this seam. And now that we've taken it back from the sewing machine, it's time to make sure that we clipped those corners before we turn it right side out. And then just use the end of something pointy like a chopstick to push those points out. Then, depending on the size of bag you chose to make, it will depend on how much ribbon you need. So all I do is I measure 3 times across the top of my bag, and then I cut my ribbon length that way. Cut 2 ribbons at this length if you want the ends coming out both sides of your casing. There are a few different ways that you can add your ribbon. The first being just attach a safety pin to your ribbon, and then you can pull it through your casing. Or if you find that frustrating, then you can invest in something like this point and turner tool here, and it just helps by pinching your ribbon, and then you can easily glide it through the other side of your casing.
All right, so you can stop there and just add the 1 ribbon all the way around, tie a knot at the end, and then pull it tight and your gift bag is done. Or you can add a 2nd ribbon, and by adding the 2nd ribbon, so the first ribbon comes around here and then goes on back, you've tied a knot. But if you add a 2nd ribbon, then you'll start from the opposite side, you'll come on through, loop around, and you'll come back. And by doing that, you'll actually end up with 4 ties on both sides, and then you'll be able to pull it tight, and then it's done. And that, my friends, is everything that you need to know to sew an adorable gift bag. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please click that thumbs up button if you found this tutorial helpful. Subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss future tutorials, especially if you are a beginner sewer. I hope you have a wonderful day. Happy sewing. Bye.